According to the Politico, the headline is most Republicans support declaring the United States a Christian nation. Now, of course, these are a group of professors who are freaked out by the idea of Christian nationalism, the belief the United States was founded as a white Christian nation and that there's no separation between church and state. Now, that's the fear scenario. A lot of people who now call themselves Christian nationalists would say, no, I am an American citizen, a patriot. I think my country should come first. God should come first. And I think that the nation would be best served if it followed what God said in the Bible. I guess that makes me a Christian nationalist. I think that we have a role to play as Christians in politics to persuade people that our views on life, the abortion issue, and the rest of it is better if we understand and have a Christian worldview. But we're a pluralistic society. Now, there are some people who say, well, we're not really pluralistic. We're a pluralistic among Christian denominations. That's not actually true. In the history of this country, if you actually understand the history of this Constitution, understand the history of America, shows, in fact, that that's not true. But there's this rising movement in the country that we as a nation should embrace the idea that we are a Christian nation. Do you know what the Wilhelm scream is? The Wilhelm scream is a very famous scream that's in movies. I'm not going to play you the montage. It lasts about 15 minutes. There's some bad words in it as people scream it, but you've heard the scream. When the stormtroopers fall off in the Death Star, when the Nazi falls off the cliff in Raiders of the Lost Ark, well, when one of the guys falls down the elevator in Die Hard, you hear the Wilhelm scream. It's the most famous scream in movie history. Now, what is the Wilhelm scream? Well, the Wilhelm scream is a stock sound effect that came into being in 1951 with the film Distant Drums. It's become very famous. Ben Burt, I think, was the guy who came up with it. It has been in so many movies. It's been in A Star is Born. It was in Star Wars. It was in every Indiana Jones and subsequent Star Wars movie. It's almost become an in-house joke. It was in The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett. It was in the Pixar short Lift. It's been in The Incredibles. It's been in Toy Story and Cars. It's been in Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, Lizzie McGuire, The Fairly Odd Parents, The Simpsons, Futurama, Invader Zim, The Shield, Sons of Anarchy, The Powerpuff Girls, Star Trek Enterprise, Venture Brothers, Family Guy, American Dad, The Cleveland Show, Danny Phantom, Stargate Atlantis, The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. It's been in a lot of shows. It's a famous scream. I would submit to you that the rise of Christian nationalism in America is the Wilhelm scream of Christians in politics. It's the scream you scream as you're falling off the cliff. America is a post-Christian nation. We're not a Christian nation. We've been a nation full of Christians, but we've never been a nation that was a Christian nation. Thomas Jefferson very famously wanted to edit the Bible. The man who wrote our Declaration of Independence wanted to write out the parts of the Bible he didn't particularly like, and he wasn't really down with all of the miracles of the Bible. He was one of the founders of our nation. Many of our founders had deist philosophies, and I realized that there are Christian historians who have willfully revised a lot of that so that they can actually take their ending point that we're a Christian nation and walk it back and twist history and truth to make it so, but it's not really so. We were a nation that obviously was full of Christians and therefore reflected Christian values over time. But at this point, we are a post-Christian nation. And it's not a coincidence that this rise of Christian nationalism is coming in the United States at a time the nation is slipping from Christendom into post-Christendom. And I would submit to the people who want to embrace real Christian nationalism as like a matter of state policy that we're a Christian nation, that every time the state and the church get together, the church winds up losing. Whether it's the nations that allowed the Catholic cardinals to come in the Middle Ages and direct policy, or Henry VIII setting aside the Church of England, or the Lutheran Church in Scandinavian countries, you name it. When the church and the state get in bed together, the church becomes co-opted by the state, because the church becomes co-opted by the world, because who's in charge of the earthly church? Sinners. On this past Friday, I spoke to a group of pastors. And I rarely get to preach these days. I do. Preaching is a challenge because I thought everybody could just talk off the top of their head for 3 hours. Turns out it's a skill set I have, and a lot of people don't. I just assumed everybody could do it. Preaching is more of a challenge to me. I actually have to work at it, get it right, because there's damnation involved if you lead people astray. You got to be careful. And so Amos is my favorite book in the Bible. New Testament, Old Testament combined. I love the book of John. Don't get me wrong. Everybody does. But Amos, I have a soft spot for Amos in large part because of a survey several years ago that Amos is the book of the Bible you are least likely to hear preached from in a conservative evangelical church. You are, for perspective, more likely to hear a sermon preached out of the book of Numbers than out of the book of Amos in a Bible-believing Christian church. And the reason is because Amos is the most cited book of the Old Testament in progressive congregations, because Amos preaches a social gospel, or so the left and the right tend to believe, and they've all misunderstood it. Amos preaches justice, not social justice. Amos preaches God's justice in society. And in chapter 7 of Amos, after the plumb line prophecy, Amos is confronted by Amaziah, the priest in Bethel. Now, you need to understand the dynamics here. Israel split off from Judah, and the kings of Israel decided they needed to do something to keep people from going back to the temple in Jerusalem, so they concocted a conspiracy theory. And they essentially said that Aaron and the golden calf was real religion, and Moses was the conspiracy. And they set up golden calves at Gilgal and Bethel, and they encouraged the people of Israel, don't go to the temple in Jerusalem, go to Bethel and make sacrifices there to the golden calf, which represents God. Remember, Aaron was Levite. He was the head of the priest. He did this. It's got to be real. And they had the high priest at Bethel, Amaziah. And Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, sent to Jeroboam, the king of Israel, saying, Amos has conspired against you in the midst of the house of Israel. The land is not able to bear all of his words, for thus Amos has said, Jeroboam shall die by the sword, and Israel must go into exile away from his land. And Amaziah said to Amos, O seer, go, flee away to the land of Judah, eat bread there, prophesy there. Never again prophesy at Bethel, for it's the king's sanctuary. It's the temple of the kingdom. Essentially, Amaziah is telling Amos, you go make money down in Judah saying what you want to say, preaching what you want to preach. We got a good thing going up here. You're ruining it. Amaziah was a priest of a church that was interwoven into the government. And as a result, Amaziah, the priest at Bethel, was not interested in sin. He was interested in the socio-political economic ramifications of Amos's prophecies. And as you weave a Christian denomination into a governmental setting, the same thing happens. The church worries about the socio-political economic fallout, not the sin. And here comes Amos saying you got to be worried about the sins of the people. The people of Israel are misbehaving. God has now made you rich as an act of mercy, because this is the best you're going to have it. You're about to be killed. And Amos says, oh, you can't tell people we're going to be killed. Forget all the sin stuff. And then tells Amos, go cash in Judah. You go do your trick in Judah. We're making money up here. You're cutting into our money. Reminds me of all those prosperity gospel pastors who surrounded themselves with Trump and laid hands on Trump. Oh, yeah. Does that make you mad? Might make you mad for me to tell you this, but it's God's honest truth. You had a bunch of transactionally arranged prosperity gospel ministers who had a transactional friendship with Donald Trump where they couldn't care less if the man burned in hell as long as he gave them the policy they wanted. How many people decided that they were going to be pastor friends of Donald Trump so they could get what they wanted for their church and didn't care one whit whether or not the man went to hell? We're not a Christian nation. We're a post-Christian nation. And if you're a Christian in a post-Christian nation, what should you do? You should spend more time worried about saving people for God than saving your nation, because all the nations of this planet are going to burn, including this one. No nation lasts forever except God's nation, the kingdom of God, and we are not God's nation. God's nation is a multi-ethnic, diverse group of people around the entire world. There are probably more Christians in China than there are total Americans right now. What did Amos say you should do? It's exactly what you and I should do in a post-Christian nation. Seek good and not evil that you may live. Hate evil, love good, establish justice. We're supposed to act on our faith, not just say we believe it, because God hates a dead faith. Religion in Israel was co-opted by the state for a nationalistic purpose. They even concocted shrines in places that had real meaning for the Israelites. Bethel was where God had wrestled with Jacob, is where God was supposed to be, and now there was a golden calf there. Gilgal was where God's people consecrated themselves when they crossed the River Jordan, and now there was religion without the reality of God. Beersheba was still in Judah, but the people of Samaria would cross over still. It's where God met Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Amos tells the people of Israel, stop going down to Beersheba. God's not there anymore for you. What happens in places where the state and the church intertwine themselves is that you get a highly developed sense of religion and religious practice and a lot of moral corruption. If you don't believe me, we saw that on display in Great Britain this past week, where the Church of England totally allows moral corruption while it engages in high priestly ritual rites and robes and ceremony and incense. It's a problem. And as you decide we're a Christian nation and you embrace Christian nationalism and you try to weave the state and the church together, you're not going to be able to do what all the other Christians who did this in the past have done, have God come out on top. You can't be like the world. We're supposed to speak into the world, not conform to the world. And when your religion gets in bed with your government, your religion conforms to the government, not the other way around. It's never happened. Even when David was king of Israel, he had problems living up to God. You can't be a Republican in church. You got to be a Christian in politics. And the way you do that is not to bring your religion into your politics. It's not to carry the water for a politician or a political party. It's to bear a cross. I'm deeply disturbed these days by the number of people on my side of the aisle and in my church who can't criticize politicians, who get defensive when you point out Donald Trump was a man married 3 times and had an affair on his pregnant 3rd wife with a porn star. Oh, what does it matter? Well, you people told me character counted. Does it not now? Because your side's winning? Can't have transactional politics here when eternity's at stake. The parties are full of sinners. If you offer a political message devoid of grace and warmth to the other side, if you decide the other side's the enemy, they're the heretics and they're going to burn, well, guess what? They're created in God's image too. And you're supposed to love your neighbor. It's hard to love your neighbor when your neighbor's on the political side opposite of you and you've decided you're a Christian nation and your church and your politics are perfectly compatible together, when frankly, they never are, because politicians, politics, and political platforms are full of sinful people doing sinful things. And you got to decide at the end of the day, are you with God's kingdom or your kingdom? America is not a Christian nation. I don't think it ever has been. Even if we were a nation full of Christians, it was never set up to be a theocracy or to model God's kingdom. But I can tell you for one thing, it is absolutely, positively not a Christian nation now. It is a nation where a lot of people who claim to be Christian go fishing on Sunday instead of to church. And a lot of people who say they love the Jesus they've concocted in their head, not the Jesus who's in the Bible. So maybe we should learn to distinguish between the two and instead of trying to amalgamate them together, because it's not going to work. The history of the entire world shows it's not going to work. So Republicans, be Republicans. But pick what's more important to you, eternity or a temporary world.